Welcome to the Stampscapes lab. I'm working on a grayscale piece, kind of in an odd shape on a piece of cardstock, semi-gloss. Couldn't think of that name for a second there. But I thought I would start the video right here because this is a cabin in the snowy trees from one of the latest nature sets. And it doesn't have a shoreline, okay? But these other images from nature set number 41, they do have this shoreline in here. I think it's nature set number 41. I don't know, specify down in the uh, the description section when I'm done with this set. But anyways, this is a stamp that I used in this background right here. And these other parts right here, I mean, it could be a shoreline or it could be just, a transitional area that goes into a meadow or something like that, as can this one right here. But this one right here, you probably wouldn't have trees like right in the water, right? So what I thought I would do is I would just take the shoreline off of this one and add it to this image right here, so we wouldn't have this kind of sharp transition right into the water, which would look kind of bizarre. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ink up a portion of this design right here, and I'm going about, I don't know if I'm going like a 1/4 inch. It's definitely like 1/8 of an inch though into that design. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, okay? But that's what it looks like there. So I'm just grabbing a portion of this design for the utilization for my whatever intended purposes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my bearings right here and figure out where this is going to be. Okay, so I'm looking right here. I'm kind of putting this right there, and I kind of keep going like this a little bit to get that shoreline configured. And I'm just going to stamp it down. Now, I'm not expecting this to blend right in. I'm expecting to have a little bit of space in between the shoreline and that image above. But if it blends in, that's fine too. Okay, but see what that did right there? We gave it that shoreline right there, and that kind of bends around like that, and this comes out this way, so we'll have a little bit more land like that. Not perfect, but again, this, the whole thing about kind of scene building is that it doesn't need to be perfect. Because, land masses and variation and things like that out in nature, I mean, they vary all the time. You get a little storm that comes through and it changes your landscape, okay? So this is the Tiny Rock Small, and I'm adding this into the scenario, giving myself a little bit of a kind of a shallow shoreline right there with those rocks exposed, and then we'll put some of these rocks in like this in the background. We'll also bring in that kind of shallower area. Maybe it's low tide or something like that if this is a seaside type of thing. Or if it's just a lake, maybe the water level is down a little bit from, I don't know, whatever maximum. I'll use this a little bit on the perimeter, a little bit more, like kind of coming down here a little bit, and that helps to frame things off a little bit. All right, so we have that, and now we have this little shoreline right here. You can draw things in too, I guess. It would look a little bit strange, even for me to draw it in. I designed the stamps, but you just blend it out with a little bit of texturing, and you're good to go. Okay, so let's see right here. I was thinking about maybe a mountain behind here. We can put additional trees or anything in the background, but maybe some background mountains might be kind of interesting, and I'll go look for my Rocky Peaks stamp right now. All right, here's an example of the different types of things you can do. Here's like some kind of more mellow, I don't know, whatever, Appalachian Trail types of backgrounds in here. Or you can go more kind of a change in, I don't know, kind of shape and texture with a little bit more of like a rocky peak type of thing. maybe what the West, you know, Rocky Mountain National Park, or I don't know, whatever, the Cascades type of thing. Could be in other parts of the world too, but we'll get that stamped out. Now here's a little trick here. I mentioned this a lot in my videos, but the lower portion of this stamp naturally transitions out. I put dots down here instead of solids, but what you do is you can just kind of wipe off the bottom portion of that, if you're stamping it in black especially, so that, do it with a dry paper towel. And I'm just kind of patting the base right here and taking off more off the bottom, a little bit less right here, and then none off the top. And then you don't have to really do any masking on here. Let's say I want it to stamp this like so. I'm putting it right into my trees, but the bottom portion of this is really kind of blotted off quite a bit. So that when you do that, you get this kind of lighter portion. See how dark it is up here? And then there's a lighter portion down below. And then I have this area right here. Let's see. We'll use this portion of the stamp. I'll wipe that off right there pretty good. I'll wipe off that side of it too a little bit, where it's going to transition into this one. Get this stamped out like so. So it's kind of transitioning down below, but also into this image over here. So I wiped out this side and then this bottom portion right there. And do you see how kind of light it stamps out right there? And it looks like it's behind this one right here. And those lighter textures right in there don't interfere with the silhouette of the closer tree objects right there. So see, now you can stamp it out in black, and that looks, you know, it's fine to do that too. Maybe it's a darker time of day or something like that, but you know, it'll just obscure that slightly. You know, right in here, I could have wiped this off a little bit more, but you can see how it looks with these trees against that darker background, where the ones over here and here stand out a little bit more because I wiped off more ink. So it's always kind of an option to you, and it's a really simple technique. You just kind of wipe it off, again, with a dry paper towel before you stamp it out, and you get a varied value impression. And you don't have to use like black and gray, you know, and a lighter gray ink or something like that. You just use one color and you wipe it off, and you'll get a varied impression, you know, with kind of minimal work. All right, so that's the foundation right here. We'll add in some additional foreground in here, and I think I'm going to wait to add that in a little bit later. But I think I thought I might want to experiment a little bit. I haven't done this in a long time, but I haven't used my water-reactive watercolor pencils in a while, so I thought I would add some shades down there and go in there and kind of blend it out a little bit. I'm not a really good watercolorist or anything like that. Very, yeah, not experienced at that, you know. And I've done it before a few times on this channel, but, you know, every time I've done it on this channel, that's, you know, the only times I've done it. Okay, so I'll probably add in some other, like a little figure in here, like a, I don't know, fisherman or a moose or something like that. But I think I want to get things laid out a little bit first before I add in what I want to be, you know, some really crisp imagery impressions in here. All right. Okay, so on this, what I'm going to start doing is, you can see the darker areas of my imagery, and what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start adding in some grayscale tones. Okay, everything right now is stamped in black and white, even though it looks kind of grayish. It's because, you know, I define my imagery a lot of times with value, but it's really just little dots that are, you know, the dot density pattern, they call it stippling, is heavier in the areas where it looks like a darker gray. But since we're using pencils here, I can actually do a gray application, and, you know, however dark I want it to go. And again, we're going to go in here and blend it around a little bit with some water. I'm going to leave this largely just bare white in the background. I might put a little bit of tone in there, I'm not sure, but so I'm going a little bit darker at the top of my mountain to create a nice strong silhouette. A lot of times when I have a darker sky or a blue sky or something like that and it's shining down on the mountains, I have my mountains top lit, but instead we'll do them a little bit more bottom lit. Kind of akin to the ink painting type of example that I did. It wasn't an ink painting, but reminiscent of that style. Chinese ink paintings, that is. Okay, so adding this down like that. See, I'm leaving some areas light. I'm mostly going into areas that are kind of inherently a little bit darker. Now, I toned that one in just so that it creates some contrast between the background. But see, I'm not coloring in everything like the entire mountain because I want some light to be look like it's hitting it or reflecting off of it. Make this a little bit darker around the perimeter to create a little bit more of a vignette. I usually like kind of darker perimeters. Now see, this is a darker shoreline, right? So what you do is you'd create transitions, okay? So I'm coloring it at the base like this, and then I'm transitioning it a little bit. I have a little bit of an area that's not colored in, and then we'll do it from the base, or from the, I guess the edge of the shoreline in the water. So we went from the edge of the shoreline up, transitioned from darker to lighter. And down here, we'll go darker to lighter away from that edge again. But, you know, high to low. The shoreline and up is low to high. I guess I don't need to get too smooth with my applications here because I'm going to be, you know, putting some water down on that anyway. Okay, shoreline in the water, high to low. When I say high to low, I mean it's within kind of a small space, like a 1/4 inch or something. Okay, I got ants walking around on my desk here. All right, see my this kind of grayscale tone is kind of bringing the different areas and imagery together a little bit. Okay, shoreline right here. Now, if this is kind of a reflection down here, I would, you know, there'd be a lot more trees going down this way, but I didn't draw that into the design because it would have made for a gigantic stamp, and then we wouldn't have had room for other imagery on the stamp. So sometimes I add in the reflection imagery into a stamp if it's kind of small enough, but otherwise, when it starts getting big, it's just like, I kind of leave the adding the shadow, you know, to the stamper. Should they add that in there? So not everything's going to be backlit, I guess. So you don't have the, you know, the shadows coming down this way on in the front side. You can tone in some of these rocks right here. See this right here? Kind of what I'm doing is I'm leaving some of those rocks kind of lighter, so it looks like some light is hitting it. See this right area right in here? I see this kind of this tree that's lighter. Looks like a large tree turning colors in the fall maybe. But I can put some tone underneath it to make it stand out a little bit more. Same thing right over here. Let's go with this. These are the same, it's the same stamp, just used in two different locations here. Okay, I think that looks pretty good there. All right, let's get some water and add in these trees here. Maybe I should add in a little bit of tone in here. It seems weird kind of going in. I mean, it looks okay, but I don't know, I'm getting these withdrawals, in terms of like tree treatments. I feel like I should be adding something to it, but I don't know, you really don't have to. It looks okay as is. Okay, I'm putting some little bit of tone around that to make that cabin stand out a little bit more, so you just kind of darken in some trees behind that rooftop, and it can look like that. It kind of pops it out from the background a little bit. All right, let's get some water and a brush. Okay, we got some water and a pretty big paintbrush here. This one's a number 5. I don't know what I'm actually doing. I kind of know the concept, of course, but, these watercolor pencils here, but I might not know what I'm doing, but I know how to have some fun and experiment. Okay, I'm going to take off some water out of this a little bit, and I'm going to try to transition this. So I'm going to work from the outside edge in a little bit. I'm going to do it kind of in a dry brush. See, that's almost like way too much right there. So I'm going to take off some water so it's not kind of streaking too much like it did. Let's take off a lot more here. And work it from edge over like this. I'm kind of working it in the direction that I want these kind of transitioning swipes to look. Okay, so from the outside in, dark to lighter, okay? And the opposite direction on the other side of the card. And I'll just keep utilizing some of that darkness right there, and I'm bringing it down in here too. I didn't apply any of that pencil down this way, but I can still utilize some of that whatever pigment from up there. Okay, let's see if I can kind of control this one a little bit more. I mean, that's fine, but I wanted it a little bit more controlled, I think. See, that's really thick right there. Let's dry brush and we'll go backwards a little bit. Yeah, that did it. It kind of removes too, get a little water on your brush and kind of go back the other way. I'll put some of this in my rock here. And let's go up into, before I go up in those mountains, let's come down here a little bit more and transition that. One good thing about the watercolor pencils is that you can lay it down, but it goes back into solution with water, of course, so. Okay, now let's try, okay, keep looking at this. I want to transition that a little bit more in there. Okay, let's try up here in my mountains. I'm kind of going with the, kind of the spirit of those mountains and the slopes, okay? In terms of kind of brush direction. All right, and we have this little space up here. I said that I was going to leave that largely blank, but I think we can come in there with a little bit of a tone. Let me grab some tone off of these mountains right here, and I'll come in from this way. Kind of real streaky looking. And let's see, oh, we got this little spot up there too. Let's go into that little space. And we have something like this. Now, I might go in here and add some additional, I don't know, tone or temperature or texture into this scene. But what we'll do is we'll wait for this to dry. Or I might even come into it with some, some additional watercolor pencil colors, so it's not just all grayscale, although grayscale can be pretty fun. Or we might add in some extra shading in here as well. So one of the things you can do is you can kind of do that water reactive type of thing and, spread out some, let me get this out of the way here. You can get some additional, whatever shading going back to your pencil and adding that in after that water reactive type of effect that you, water soluble effect that you apply in there. So like right in here, if I want to get a little bit more tone, then we'll add some of this in. But let's wait for this to dry because I need to see how it's going to look when it dries. Sometimes when media dries, it takes on a different value. It might get darker or it might get lighter. So I need to get gauge that. All right, this has been setting up for about 10-15 minutes. It dries pretty fast. So I'm going to go in and establish some of these shadow areas again, a little bit more, I don't know, whatever, firmly, I guess. Because the water has dissolved a lot of it, but I wanted that kind of watercolory, real freeform type of look. But I still want the contrast and I guess some texturing that just the straight pencil application will provide. Right in here where I kind of swooshed down, I lost some kind of, some of the more delicate, I guess, applications of, lighter grays. So I'll just go in and reapply some of that. try some more free-form types of streaks in here to, I don't know, I guess I was going to say contrast against the more brushy looks, but I think it's more of like a harmony that I'm talking about, blending in rather than having a contrast against that. All right, so something like that. And then I think I'm going to go in and add in like a little focal point in here, or down in this area. And let's see what that... All right, I've chosen a moose, and I'm going for a moose that's kind of looking this way. Just because I'm putting them down here, more so on the lower right-hand corner. I usually like to have them looking into the scene, so if they're right of center, I have them looking left. If they're left of center, I have them looking right. Not all the time, but usually. Okay, I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to wipe off some of the shadow area down here so that I get a little bit of a transitioning shadow instead of just a uniform one. And we'll go for a pretty decent impression time down here, just because I'm stamping over the top of, watercolor pencils. So I don't know if that's kind of like a little bit of a waxy coating. I don't know, it wouldn't be wax, but soluble, whatever watercolor paint, I guess. We'll go like that. Provides us a pretty decent dark focal point like that. And let me think about some additional tones in here. All right, I have decided to leave this as is. I kind of like the grayscale. I don't think it has any kind of temperature to it. It's rather a neutral gray, but I thought the things that we'll add to it will be, from a textural standpoint, as I always like to do. Some white pigment ink right here on a cotton ball. Okay, and let's push this mountain back a little bit. Visually, I'm talking about, by adding in some kind of pale, or a light application of white pigment ink like that. And I can put a little bit more of a transition from the bottom down here. It gives it a little bit of texture. See, I kind of, get a little bit dark in there with the water soluble, the painting part of it. Yeah, I could still remove some of it if I want to, but you can just do it kind of just as easily with this method right here. So just kind of putting this kind of glowing cloud. That's what it looks like to me. In the back of these trees in here, in between the trees and the mountain, it kind of adds a nice little touch, texture touch, but it's also a lighting touch because, you're adding white pigment ink. Okay, right around in here, I think it looks just fine as is, but just going for a little bit of a textural change like this. So I'd say I added a little bit of this mist. Now, see, you gave this card to someone and, they might not, it might not even register with them kind of in terms of what you did, but I think it kind of adds this different mood to the piece that they'll, they can see it certainly, but I think it's more kind of felt in some ways. See this mountain right here, how it gets pushed back in the distance. Let's add a little bit to this. A little shoreline type of thing. And right around some mist at the base of this shoreline, or whatever it is, island. And let's add some right down here. It's kind of like on the insides of these objects, the inner side. So it kind of puts the light right around in here. And then see this mousse right here. I'll add some of it down. Right down here, and it kind of puts the mousse in that lighting, that soft lighting. All right, so that is that. Now let's go back to a little bit more foreground imagery, okay? And we'll just finish it off with this. This is just some leaves right here. You can have a taller pine tree or something like that. We already have the pine trees up here, so if I put a tall pine, it would be amongst, it would go right into these other trees. So I'll have like a smaller element that I can control. Like this right here is some leaves, and I could put it below that. And again, this, I'm stamping it over the top of, you know, watercolor paint applications and white pigmenting, so you might stamp and hold just for a little bit longer than what you would normally do. Put some leaves over here as if kind of we're standing on a ledge overlooking this whole scenario. See where those leaves go up, and that some of that white pigmenting gets stamps lighter, but you know, lighter leaves looks okay. Alright, so get something like that. So kind of, yeah, this little, I don't know, whatever, lower foreground section of leaves kind of frames things off a little bit more, gives us a little bit more, it adds some distance into the piece. And let's see what this looks like. I'll put a little bit of a mat around it, and let's see what this final piece looks like. And relatively, you know, fast production with, you know, when you're only working in grayscale. All right, final piece. I didn't trim this bottom portion off because I thought I might put in some sort of like word or quote stamp down there. But just a simple matte black frame around this monochromatic grayscale piece like this. There's still, you know, when I'm looking at some of these things, it'd be kind of cool to put like a, I don't know, you can put like a little subtle types of things in here. You can put a little like silver glitter on, you know, something like that. I think that would look pretty cool. I don't know, yeah. Little spot colors or something like that. Or I thought about doing is like tinting some of these gray scale areas with a little bit of green tinge. I think that might look kind of interesting, but for now, we'll just leave it like this. And those other types of things I can always add in later right over the top of this. Because I didn't seal this off, and you really don't need to seal this one off. Everything's adhered just fine to it. Even the white pigment ink is dried and adhered just fine on this type of semi-gloss white cardstock. Okay, anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks as always for tuning into the Stampscapes channel.